If I were the Prime Minister, I'd be concerned on what else would the minister be doing in the ministry.
You've said he should be fired, Mikael Phillips. You've said Vaz should be fired for what he said in the Parliament, haven't you?
He should be. I mean, it is
10 days after announcing that he would recommend the immediate ban of ride-hailing apps, Transport Minister Daryl Vaz advised that the ban failed to materialize after telecommunication providers failed to accede to a request from the government. In a directive on June 4, Minister Vaz instructed telecoms providers Digicel and Flow to restrict ride-sharing applications from accessing their respective platforms. He says since the announcement of the ban, to date, only one telecoms provider has responded.
I received a formal response from one telco 6 days later on the 10th, and one I have yet to get a response from. And in discussions, both have indicated an unwillingness to block the apps on the basis that there is no legislation in place. I feel very strongly that any minister of government who sees or deems an issue as a national security risk, that legislation should be in place, and it should be clear and definitive that it is an instruction and an order, not a request. And I will be moving to have discussions with the Minister of National Security and my cabinet to make sure that this is done in the shortest possible time.
That's Daryl Vaz, the minister in charge of telecoms and transport. He says he's contemplating the establishment of regulations that will prevent telecoms companies from denying requests from the government which seeks to protect national security. And he noted at present then there is effectively no ban on ride-sharing apps.
And in a release to the media on Friday, Minister Vaz advised commuters to exercise caution while engaging ride-sharing companies until there is legislation in place to properly regulate their operations in the country. The minister says local ride-sharing companies are allowed to continue operating while the Transport Authority continues to develop those regulatory framework. And meanwhile, the opposition spokesman on transport, Mikael Phillips, is criticizing the government for its failure to properly restrict ride-sharing applications operating in the island. Mr. Phillips joins us now. Good morning to you.
Morning to you. Morning to your listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Nationwide this morning. What do you make of the latest developments in relation to the ride-hailing apps and their operators?
Well, we would have expected that the minister would have, when coming to Parliament to do his sectoral presentation and make the announcement, would have done all of the legal checks before making such an announcement. On Thursday, we issued a press release asking for an update because we got reports from persons within our society that they were able to still access the ride-sharing apps, while some other local operators made the claim that they're still blocked from utilizing their apps. So hence we asked for an update from the minister. The minister giving the update that it hasn't been. So, we're hoping that the minister would quickly put some short-term measures in place in how to regulate it. This could have been avoided from 2019 once we established that there were ride-hailing operations in Jamaica. And, we encouraged the then minister to put in legislation to manage that operations. We do encourage, as an opposition, I've said it repeatedly, that we do encourage competition in the market, utilization of technology, but they ought to abide by the laws and rules of the land.
Do you think the approach that the minister took to come to Parliament and say that he's recommending the ban on the apps, was that the right one?
Well, seeing the minister would have had more information than I had, and I know that for quite a while there has been a national security issue. It was heavy-handed, at that moment. Yes, we supported it because, from day one I've always and consistently said that no matter which company comes into operate in Jamaica, they ought to abide by the law of the country. And that also, as it is now, there is no protection for the traveling public in it. There you have operators operating that would not have the same vetting process as those who are in the public transport sector. And I think we have a responsibility to the consumer themselves and also the protection of an industry. So hence we supported it under that a temporary halt of the operation until some measures are put in place. We would have supported a 1 year, but we do feel that there are some short-term measures that can be put in place until a wider range of legislation is thought of and tabled in Parliament.
The question of regulations of a service such as taxi services, there is the strong argument that when people create apps to provide access to services that already exist, governments have to be careful about regulation so that you don't stifle free enterprise, you don't stifle free creativity. Is that a point you agree with in principle, Mikael Phillips?
Yes, I do. As I said, ride-hailing is somewhat new to Jamaica in the sense that, operating by an app, there's no legal office set up for the operation in Jamaica. We ought to, within the regulation itself, to encourage technology that more can enter the space. But also, it will give us an opportunity to look at the regulations that we have that governs the public transport sector itself. In some instances, heavy-handed in some. We can over-regulate. Mm-hmm. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really look at regulations, because sometimes we make it more difficult for persons to operate within the space than ought to.
Yeah.
So, yes, I take the point. As I said, that we expect some short-term measures. We have made the suggestion that there ought to be a vetting process for the drivers, just like those within the public transport sector. So, some agreement has to be made with the owners of the app that persons registered to, that at least they go through the vetting process of providing a police record, just like those in the public transport space now, mm-hmm. and issued a badge by the transport authority. Now, this gives the transport authority and the process itself for a shorter period of time, how it is that you can speed that up, because one can register an app within an hour,
yes,
and get approved. So how do you are able to speed up the process so that it doesn't take days to get that badge? Ensuring that all the legislation is in place to have passengers covered by the insurance of these of the persons who are now registering on the app and operating with these ride-hailing companies.
Here's why I put that point to you mm-hmm. early, because I'm in the conversation about why the relevant regulations weren't in place at the start of the wave of taxi apps, let's call them that. I was reasoning to myself to say, well, any government in charge of a country won't want to present an obstacle to free enterprise, won't want to present an obstacle to creativity. And it's not as if there's a new service being provided or created. What is happening is that you can access existing services in a new way. And so a group of university students come together and say, boy, let's create an app called Food to Go, or let's call Mikael's Taxi then, for argument's sake. And what will happen is that rather than having to call a taxi with credit that you may not have, or get a taxi otherwise. You go on this app and you can get one. So at the start, because I'm trying to, there's a conversation about why the regulations weren't in place before, and it may be that consideration, which was perhaps blind to the things that are causing the problems we're talking about now, that approach is what created the environment for so many apps to have come up over time in the taxi business into a space that there is no regulation.
Well, you have local companies that operate a similar app, but had to go through the process as a route taxi.
But those are normally tied to brick and mortar companies who are extending their reach into the social media space. So those are usually tied to brick and mortar operations. For instance, On Time has an office in the Halfway Tree area. El Shaddai has an office, just to name a few, and the ones that we are used to over time. So they yeah.
You have 876 who basically, I mean, it's really
purely app based.
An app. Yes,
yeah.
It's an app that they operate from, through. They have their operations here in Jamaica, and they operate in a similar operation or access, just like the Uber or the Drive. So I think what happened is that we basically just moved too slow at where technology is concerned.
Yeah.
And putting in legislation or regulations themselves to manage those, because I keep on saying, when persons say, "Why am I siding with the minister on that one?" We also have to be a responsible opposition and a responsible government in waiting. And there's also not just the responsibility of bringing new players in the space, but also a responsibility to the protection of the consumer.
Yes.
At the same time.
And when
if anything was to happen to a passenger in one of these vehicles who have had a rideshare vehicle, as the police said, there's nothing in place, no legislation, no regulations in place for them to take action.
Yes. and as the minister in waiting, what I want is to get from you is this point. Even as you don't want to be obstructionist in the ways that we have agreed, blocking creativity and so forth, for certain activities such as transporting people, where you made the point about insurance kicking in and the badge and the antecedents of the driver, you would expect a government to move to put regulations in place where the creation of certain apps for certain activities are concerned, even as you want to make the environment a hindrance free for the creation of access to services.
Yes, certainly, and I think we have to be forward thinking, because even these apps, as I said, it was not created just yesterday or when the minister made the announcement in Parliament. There were two ministers prior to him who were there when the entrance of these operators within the space itself, and it was really just a cloak over their eyes of ignoring that they're operating in the space, because there was no real national issue in dealing with it. I mean, we raised it in Parliament in 2019, 2020. About the regulations and just the safety of the consumer itself. So, the administration has to take some responsibility of where we are now with it. But there are other apps that's been entering the space itself, and having to ensure that not only that we make it an environment for them to operate, and something that, as we have been saying earlier, not to be an hindrance, but how to create a space for creativity and for technology, and also at the same time protection of the consumer is where we need to go.
And speaking of ignoring and creating the right environment for them to operate, on the weekend as well, Mr. Phillips, the minister disclosed to us that the telecommunications providers in Jamaica I've basically ignored the recommendation that he made to have this ban until they've sorted out that environment for that sub-transport sector. Was it wrong for the telecoms people to take that approach, to say, not banning right now?
Well, I'm more concerned of how it is that the minister could come to the parliament and to make an announcement without doing the proper legal checks. I mean, in his presentation in Parliament, he actually said, if you go back to the recording, that he'll be ordering a ban, but he has not done the legal checks, and then he went ahead and issued the ban. If I were the Prime Minister, I'd be concerned on what else would the minister be doing in the ministry.
You've said he should be fired, Mikael Phillips. You've said Vaz should be fired for what he said in the Parliament, haven't you?
He should be. I mean, it is irresponsible of any minister to come to the Parliament and to make an announcement like that without doing any legal checks. We would, if we were to make everything an announcement without putting any real tangible changes, then everything would have changed in the country already.
But based on the grounds that he said it, he was advised by the Jamaica Constabulary Force of certain things, came to the Parliament and has told the nation that it's national security risk on which he's making this recommendation. Wasn't that a reasonable ground to ask for a temporary ban?
Well, it would have to take a multiple sectoral approach on who it is. There's an Attorney General Department, for them to guide the government itself on what is legal from what is not illegal. The point I'm making, I'm not saying that it is not the right of the minister to make the announcement. I said we also agreed with the minister, but there's a process to take place. So you can't be turning it back now on the telecoms company to act outside of the law themselves too, because there may be other legal issues that they would have to deal with the operators of the apps themselves if they go outside of the law. So the point we're making is that the minister has to be more responsible when he's making utterances like that.
On the point of responsibility and utterances, Mikael Phillips, let's zero in on it. So here's the thing. He announced in Parliament that he's recommending a ban. He read from a letter that he had written to one of the telecoms providers. The effect of the words in the Parliament caused one of the rideshare apps that was in the line of fire regarding a police investigation to make contact with the authorities. That speech in Parliament also brought the stakeholders to the table, where they've crafted a set of regulations that they have submitted to him, and he's reviewing now, waiting to put into action. So you're saying that the effect of those words, notwithstanding what has germinated from what he said in Parliament, significant grounds for the Prime Minister to ask Minister to relieve him of his duties?
Look, if you understand legislation and understand the rule of law, then that means that any minister can go out there and close down or do anything as they feel like without following the rule of law. We sit in Parliament and we make the law. It is not for any minister or anyone to flaunt the law in that manner, no matter what. We are there to protect those that follow the law, right? So it as much as it is something that is of national importance, the responsible thing to do is for the minister to contact the Attorney General's department, to contact his own legal department. He himself said that he's making this announcement without checking the legal ramification of it. That I was surprised about, and expected that the minister would have set a date for the temporary ban after finding out which minister or ministry can order that ban. I'm not saying that it cannot be made, but which minister or ministry, which one within the ambit of the law that can do it.
So you're saying that the minister effectively didn't understand his brief then?
Didn't understand his responsibility.
Hear you on that. Thank you this morning for the perspective, Mikael Phillips. Always appreciate it.